I would say that the door was a foot taller than the ceiling and gold. And when they pulled the door open, I saw a little man way back there, and that was the Archbishop. And Papa, as Jean-Marie genuflected, I didn't. Why didn't he? So that was one of his first questions. He said to me, "You are not a Catholic?" And I said, "No." "Oh, vous êtes Protestant." "Vous êtes Juif?" "No." "Alors?" And he says, "Well, what are you?" And I said, "Well, I'm a person who likes philosophers, and my favorite is Rousseau." Rousseau is a very famous French philosopher. And guess what? An enemy of the church. Everybody's face turned pink except mine. And Papa explained to him in French that, well, he's not one of us, you know. He explained somehow. But to imagine having an audience with a man whose office crowned every king of England, every king of France. Maybe others have some good questions. Who's got a good question?
Don't be shy, guys. Come on. Ask anything.
I'll pick you.
You want
you
Alexa.
had one.
Try Alexa. She's always
Okay,
got
here,
a question.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I was just wondering, did you have like a girlfriend during the war, like back home?
That's a good question. I did. After work, because I was doing office work, there was Miss Fuqua, Fuqua, and she and I would walk together to a French bar, and we would get a small cup of Cointreau. And for a chaser, let's see, what department were we in? Champagne. For a chaser, the chaser was like a nickel. The Cointreau was maybe a quarter, you know, something like that. But in French coins. So we went, that was sort of a daily trip. I think she liked me partly because I didn't make fun of her name. That was number one. Number two, I didn't make any passes at her. I didn't make any passes at boys either. I was naive, an Iowa farm kid. It was only after I left the Army that I had two paramours. They're in here. Do you know what a paramour is? I don't think you do. Your parents are not. A paramour is the friend that you have that's more important than anyone else, but you can have two of them. And I don't think that your father and your mother would want to introduce you to another couple as being close, that close. Sure, they have friends, but we did a terrible thing in my school. We had pickaninnies. Do you know what a pickaninny is? Any idea? We dressed up as blacks in 5th grade. And I was the leader. I got to wear white pants. They had to wear overalls or something. And that's really, we've come a long way racially. And that wasn't because of the war. I never saw blacks during the war. in Supreme Headquarters, we had no blacks that I recall. They may have come in. By the way, Supreme Headquarters was something like, but not like, Office Depot. Why do you go to Office Depot?
Supplies.
To get shoes, pants, beer, light bulbs, whatever, right? That's why you go. That's what Supreme Headquarters did. We supplied everybody. No matter what was needed, for 1 million people, we had to supply it. And it was my specific job to make sure that your grandparent or whoever got his mail. And if your grandparent were in general, a certain General Patton's army, he might be here on Monday, and we would expect he would be 10 miles at most away, and instead he'd be 30 miles at most. How am I going to keep track? I had a big map of France and little buttons where I post Patton's, Patton himself would be here. Some of the people some of the soldiers would be further back. But I had quite an important job making sure that grandparents of yours would be able to get their mail. That was the morale booster. If you didn't get a letter, that either meant that they didn't want you back home, or they didn't like you, or they were too busy to write. It was embarrassing if they didn't get a letter. So we did have a setup where people would write just to a soldier. And if you didn't get any mail, we'd make sure you got a letter. Did I answer that question?
Yeah. I have another one.
Oh, about the girl. Yeah. I didn't know my sexual proclivities until I left the army and came back, and guess who gave me my diploma at Columbia University? General Eisenhower. Couldn't get rid of that. And you had to go up, and there was a whole line of people to get their diploma. I didn't have time to stop and say, headquarters was, or something like that. And, but other than that, well, we had WACs. They were Women Auxiliary Corps, but they were separated. By the way, the blacks were separated, but I never saw them. There was one time when the Nazis were coming toward Reims, and there was nobody to stop them, except some bridge builders who were all black. So they knew how to use guns, so they helped keep the Nazis back. And this then meant that it made a change from the Postal Department's viewpoint also. If they'd come through, all my plans were gone. What other questions? Yes?
When you returned home from Europe, what was that like?
Say it again?
When you returned home from Europe.
They had no march down Fifth Avenue. No, I was sent to Fort Dix. And how did I get out? The surrender was signed at the end of 1945. The people who had been in the Army the longest got to go home first. I had been in 3.5 years, So I was maybe in the middle. So there was just one day that the adjutant general said, Smith, if you stay, we'll make you a warrant officer. And I knew a warrant officer wasn't an acting first sergeant, as I once was, but he wasn't a first lieutenant or a second lieutenant. It was in between. And if you stayed, you got many benefits. And I said, no, thank you. And then I was sent to Fort Dix. They sent me on a train back to Iowa. And when I got there, who met me? My mother and my father. So I never went to an Armistice Day or Veterans Day parade until much later. And the one time I did go, I carried a sign saying SHAEF, Supreme Headquarters. And there were people who understood, because they were looking for people from the 33rd Division and the 101st Airborne and all that. I was the only one who didn't have numbers. So that's how I got out. How did I get in? My parents arranged for a train ticket from Iowa to Fort Knox. So I got off at the first stop and cashed it in and hitchhiked to New York. Yes?
If you could go back in time and change something, what would you do?
If what?
If you could go back in time and you had a choice, or you could have changed something.
I go back in time every moment. Well, there are maybe 100 pictures in here, and I think I could just do this and say, I'd like to go back in time with when this picture was taken. I don't think I would, but here's a friend of mine who was a star of a Broadway play. He was a history teacher, by the way, and his name was Court Miller. He was with Harvey Firestein. But one of my paramours was a Broadway star, too. And another of my paramours was a Costa Rican. So I think I have a reputation for liking to meet people from other parts of the world. Here's a guy from the Commonwealth of Dominica. And I wrote for the newspaper there, and he was my editor. So that would have been fun to go back in time. I don't think there's any one time, I'll bet you can think of a time. Maybe in 9th grade when you passed algebra? No? Were you born in Connecticut?
No.
No.
I was born in New York.
In New York City?
Yes, Bronx, New York.
Whereabouts?
Huh?
You could.
Bronx.
Bronx.
Bronx, New York.
Bronx.
Bronx.
No problem.
That's the one borough that I know the least about. I was, when I first came to New York City, that was after the war, I was around Columbia University, meaning uptown Manhattan. And I then, by the way, I just saw one of my students here. By the way, you know Matthew Earl Jones?
James Earl Jones.
He was one of my students. Not him, his nephew.
He's nephew to James Earl Jones? Is he nephew to James Earl Jones?
Yes,
Oh.
yes.
I said, did you teach Ann Coulter? I see Ann Coulter as
Yes.
Did you teach Ann Coulter?
Yeah, she was a European in high school. She's the leading conservative. And I